Okay, today we'll start with the new chapter, chapter number 3. In this chapter we are going to talk about attitudes and job satisfaction. It is part of individual dynamics of organizational behavior. In a previous chapter we have discussed other factors such as learning, we have discussed issues the abilities and so on, okay, physical abilities, intellectual abilities, behavior modification mechanisms and so on. Today we are going to discuss other factors related to individual dynamics. We'll start with attitudes and later on in this chapter we are going to discuss job satisfaction. Now the learning objectives of this chapter, of course, as already I have mentioned, we are going to discuss issues related to attitudes and job satisfaction. When we talk about attitudes, there are different components related or of attitudes which we are going to study. We need to identify, of course, the relation between attitudes and behavior of employees within the organization. There are major job attitudes. When you talk about the attitudes, there are so many attitudes, but we are going to discuss the major attitudes related to job environment. Okay. In addition to that, later we are going to start with job satisfaction. The same, we are going to study the main concepts, ideas related to job satisfaction. In addition to knowing what are the causes of job satisfaction, and of course how employees might respond to dissatisfaction. Of course, when we talk about satisfaction, either employees are going to be satisfied or dissatisfied. If employees are not satisfied, they are going to react in a certain way. We need to understand how employees are going to react and how to deal with those behaviors. Now, let us start with attitudes. When we talk about attitudes, we say that attitude is an evaluative statement, okay, or judgments concerning objects, people, or events. Okay. How can we explain this?
When we are talking about attitudes, it's a kind of evaluation or judgment of me about the persons or the organization itself. For example, and this will be more specific or more clear in the components of attitudes. When we want to talk, for example, I like my job. I feel, this attitude will make me to do this behavior, and then will.
Okay, so those judgments or evaluative statements, how employees usually are going to use, or how it is going to affect employees' behavior.
Because everyone is going to react in a specific way according to his attitudes, I mean positively or negatively towards his job, and this will affect the quality of the jobs or tasks.
Okay. So in other words, we can say that attitude is going to affect how we are going to take our decisions.
Yes.
So partially we are talking about something which is related to how people are going to decide about things, and this is applicable also in the future when we discuss values in more assertive way even. Okay, so when we talk about attitudes, we are talking here about a component which is going to affect how we are going to take our decisions toward, of course, objects, people, or events, whatever. Okay. Now here again, we are talking about evaluative statement or judgment, okay, which is going to affect how we are going to deal with objects, other people, things, situations, whatever. Okay. Now, that's why we are studying different components related to individual dynamics, okay, because there are different dynamics which is going to affect how people are going to behave. When you talk about attitudes, here in more direct way, we are going to decide about things or people or events, whether it is, we can say, something positive that we must cope with, or it might be something negative that we need to avoid, or here there might be a reward, so we might be engaged in such activity, or there might be some sort of loss or harmful results, so we are going to avoid, and so on. Okay, so here again, it is going to help us in deciding about different issues, event, things, and so on. When you talk about attitudes, there are different components of attitude. Attitudes, it is not like a one-step process. We are talking about a process with multi-components, let me say, not steps, okay? So when you talk about attitudes, there are different components. There are three main components. The first one is the cognitive component. The second one is the affective component. And the third one is the behavioral component. When you talk about the cognitive component, here we are talking about how we perceive things or people or situations. We think in a certain way. We have ideas. We have perception about, again, things, people, situation, and so on. So this is the first component. Yes. Here we are talking about somehow about background information, we can say about prejudgment sometimes, we can say about thoughts, perception. All those are going to affect how we perceive things, people, situations, and again, and so on. Okay, so cognitive component is going to form our opinion about those things. Okay, and accordingly, we are going to, in the next step, or when we go through the next component, we are going to decide whether we like or dislike this thing, situation, and so on. Based on what?
Based on feelings and emotions.
It is a feeling, but it is based on what we believe here about those things. Okay, we are going to express our feelings whether we like or dislike something. Okay, so first we have an idea here, or we have a thought. We are going to form an opinion here. Then we are going to decide how we feel about this event, again, thing, whatever. Okay, according to that, we are going to decide what we are going to do. And here we are talking about the behavioral component. So the behavioral component here, we are talking about how we are going to respond to the situation based on our feelings toward the situation, and of course based on the thoughts or opinion that we form about this situation. Now this we can summarize by the following points. First, we are going to evaluate the situation. Then we are going to form some sort of feeling about the situation, and finally we are going to act. Okay, again, when you talk about attitudes, in some textbooks they define attitudes as it is the feeling towards something, and this is true also because it is one of the main components here. But according to what we are studying here, we are saying that there are three components. Okay, but again, an important part of any attitude is how we feel about things or other people or objects, whatever. So again here, okay, first we need to form an opinion, or we have an opinion. Okay, we are going to form a feeling, and then we are going to react according to this feeling. Okay, with what we call action. Let me go back to the first point that we have discussed. Attitudes are very important because it is going to help us to decide how to react in a certain situation. So it is going to influence our decisions, which is taken in order to deal with different situations. Okay. One of the problems which is related to our attitudes is what we call cognitive dissonance. In cognitive dissonance, we do not have one attitude. We have a package of attitudes. Okay? And those attitudes are mixed. And sometimes it is contradictory to each other. Okay? So whenever there are two or more attitudes which is not compliant to each other, we say that there is a cognitive dissonance situation. Okay? if there are conflicts between different attitudes, or if there are some attitudes which is not matching together, or sometimes maybe an attitude is not matching to a certain behavior, what are the consequences of such situation? And when we talk about cognitive dissonance, we are talking about a positive situation or negative situation? About a negative situation. What are the consequences of such situation? Yes?
This will definitely affect the judgment of the person, because he's going to have mixed and contradicted feelings about the situation, and which will affect the decision that he or she will make at the end of the day.
And how people are going to react or behave according to those decisions. Okay, so sometimes people, due to cognitive dissonance, they find it difficult to respond in a certain way. And sometimes maybe they are going to respond in a way that which is not according to what they believe.
Yes.
Okay, and this is going to create other problems which we are going to discuss also. Okay, so when you talk about cognitive dissonance, here we are talking about some sort of incompatibility between two or more attitudes, or sometimes it might be between attitudes and behaviors. Okay, so sometimes it is between attitudes, and sometimes it is between an attitude and behavior. Again, we said that this is a negative situation, and usually it is going to cause some negative consequences. That's why people must find some way how to deal with such situation. How to deal with such situation we are going to discuss later. But first, let us talk about cognitive dissonance itself. And before talking more about cognitive dissonance, let us go back to the main title, which is, does behavior always follow from attitudes? Okay, and usually, or the right answer is no.
No, yes.
Why it is no? Why behavior not always follow from attitudes?
As you just mentioned, that because we have other reasons that might affect our behavior, maybe the contradictions between the behavior and the attitudes, and so we might behave in a way that is not so with what we believe in, or the way we.
Okay, this is one of the reasons. Are there any other reasons?
Maybe sometimes we are put in a specific situations where we do not have to use our feelings or our perceptions to judge. We are forced to do something that we do not believe in, for example. So in this situation, my behavior does not flow from my attitude, because I'm forced to do this thing by the manager. Or
now, that's why this title is here, okay, to discuss the cognitive dissonance. But what I want to achieve is another point, okay. Already, from the beginning, attitudes is not the only factor which is influencing individual behavior. We have values, we have perception, we have abilities, we have learning, etc. Okay, so this is the first point. This is the first point that we need to understand here. Okay, then we can go back and discuss what is related to this title here according to this chapter. Attitudes, sometimes there is some sort of contradiction between different attitudes. Okay, so it is normal that people are not going to behave according to their attitudes. But more deep analysis here, attitudes is not the only individual dynamic which is going to shape our behavior. There are other individual dynamics, and that's what we are going to study. Already we have studied in chapter number 2, and we are going to study in chapter number 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on. So it is not only the matter of attitudes, there are other individual dynamics. But now let us go back to attitudes, okay? Because there is, in some cases, cognitive dissonance, attitudes are not going always to influence our response. Even when attitudes are involved, but sometimes there is some sort of conflict between different attitudes, or between an attitude and the right behavior that should be in a certain situation, and so on. So there are some contradictory relations in some cases, which is going to make us behave in different way, not in accordance with our attitudes. But again, when you talk about cognitive dissonance, we are talking about a situation where people are not behaving according to what they feel that they should behave accordingly, and this is going to create some sort of a situation where people are not comfortable with the situation, okay? And usually people, when they are not comfortable in a certain situation, they try to resolve the situation. Now let us discuss issues related to cognitive dissonance, okay? So when you talk about cognitive dissonance, okay, it is inconsistent attitude, behavior, relationship, and this we have discussed in the definition already, okay? But what are the consequences? Inconsistency is going to create uncomfortable situation. Already I have mentioned this point, okay? Now, people, when they have inconsistency and they have uncomfortable situation, they are going to think about what they are going to do. Okay, and what we are going to do, we need to deal with this situation. We need to have a solution to resolve the uncomfortable situation that we are dealing with. How to do that? We need to moderate the variables. We need to moderate the variables. What variables we are talking about here? What variables we are talking about here?
Maybe the importance of attitudes and
For example, how we think about attitudes, how we think about situation. When we discussed attitude, we said that there are three main components. Okay, there is the cognitive component, the feeling component, and finally the behavioral component. Okay, so we need to rethink the situation. Sometimes we need to adjust how we feel about the situation and so on in order to resolve the uncomfortable situation. Okay, so again, when you talk about cognitive dissonance, we are talking about here inconsistency or incompatibility between two or more attitudes or between attitudes and behaviors. Okay, this is going to create uncomfortable situation for the individual. People usually think about how to resolve such situation, and to do that we need to do something which is related to the variable. We need to moderate the variables, and this we call moderating variables. Okay, moderating variables, it is something or a mechanism that individuals use in order to resolve the uncomfortable situation that we have discussed. Okay, so we need to moderate variables which is related to the relation between attitude and the behavior in order to reach a normal relation between attitudes and behaviors. Okay, now how to do that? Okay, here I'm not talking about a process, I'm talking about some requirements. خلي الجوال على جنب واللعب في الجوال نكمل. Okay. Now, there are, we can say, 4 factors which we need to discuss. Understanding those factors is going to help us to find a way how to moderate the relation between attitudes and behaviors. Okay, one of those is related to the importance of the attitude. Okay, yes.
As attitude is very important for us, so it will affect the behavior. If it's related directly to our personality, and it's very important to us, so it will affect directly and have a strong relationship with behavior, either effective, negatively or positively.
So when you talk about attitudes, which is highly important for us, usually such attitudes, it's not easy to change. Okay. And usually such attitudes are based on beliefs, for example, and sometimes even it is based on values and so on. So such attitudes, usually there is high compatibility with the behavior that we usually behave accordingly. Okay, so here if the attitude is important for us, usually here the relation between the attitude and the behavior is usually it is a positive relation. Okay, the less important is the attitude, the more here the relation between the attitude and the behavior is negative. Okay, this is one side of the issue. Another side of the issue, the important attitudes for us, usually it is more stable than the unimportant attitudes, and usually such attitudes, it is stable, and again it is compatible with the behaviors that we behave. Another one is correspondence to behavior. Correspondence to behavior, here we are talking about up to what extent there is match between the attitudes and the behavior. So if the attitude is corresponding to the behavior, then here we are talking about again a healthy relation. Okay. If the attitude is not corresponding, then here we are talking about a negative relation, okay, where we need to moderate the variables in order to reach a healthy relation or a right relation between attitudes and behaviors. The third component here is accessibility. Accessibility is related to memory here. Okay, up to what extent we remember that such situations are, there is some sort of compatibility between the behavior and the attitudes and so on. The fourth point is related to social pressure. Social pressure, here we are talking about pressure which is imposed by others, with the society, colleagues, management maybe, when we are talking about the organization and so on. Okay, in such situations, what is the role of social pressure? How it is going to affect the relation between attitudes and behaviors? How it is going to affect the relation between attitudes and behaviors? Yes?
I think that the social pressure affects the attitudes which in return affect the behavior. So I think that the attitudes and the beliefs are shaped by these social pressure.
This is maybe one case, but there might be other cases. Yes?
If there is disagreement, there will be disagreement because social pressure affects negatively on the one attitude or behavior. They may act in the way that he didn't say that it's right, he didn't see that it's right, but he must behave because of this pressure which is on him.
Okay. Yes? Okay. This depends on the situation itself, right? It depends on the pressure itself and what is the real component here or content of the pressure. Yes?
I think that when you are convinced in something and you want to do, but sometimes the pressure can affect you because it shapes your decision-making process. So you are affected so much by those people.
And sometimes this pressure is positive and sometimes this pressure is negative. But whenever there is a pressure, this means that we are not going to behave according to our attitudes. Okay. So again here, if it is so, then it is going to create some sort of cognitive dissonance. Now we need to deal with this pressure in order to moderate the variables. Okay. So usually now, regardless whether our attitude is positive or negative, this is not the issue. Here we are talking about the relation between the attitude and the behavior. Okay, we have some positive attitudes, we have some negative attitudes, and so on. And all the people are alike in this situation. Okay, but again, I am not talking about the attitude itself, whether it is positive or negative. Okay, though the social pressure, it might be in some cases positive and it might be in some cases negative according to the situation itself. But what we are discussing here is the cognitive dissonance and how to deal with cognitive dissonance. So in order to deal with cognitive dissonance, we need to moderate the variables. Whenever there is a social pressure, we need to deal with this pressure in order to create compatibility between attitude and behavior. This is the situation again. Cognitive dissonance, there is no compatibility or there is incompatibility between attitudes and behavior. So in order to resolve this situation, we need to create this compatibility between attitudes and behaviors. Now the final issue is related to our experience, okay, and how whether there is some sort of previous experience related to the situation and how this is going to make us rethink the situation, and this is related to cognitive component or change our feelings about the situation, and this is related to the second part which is related to feelings, and this is going to result finally in some sort of reaction, okay, and so on. So those factors usually we need to deal with in order to, of course not always the 5 factors, depends on the situation itself, But those are examples to the factors that we might need to deal with in order to reduce the incompatibility between attitudes and behaviors. Again, to understand the relation here between cognitive dissonance and moderating the variables, we have attitude according to our prediction we might behave. Now here we need to do some changes. Those changes might be related to those factors as an example, as an important example for this issue. Okay. Now, according to how people perceive the situation and how they develop some sort of feeling and finally going to react, okay, we are going to have major job, or we are going to have attitudes, okay. Now, when you talk about organization behavior, what is important for us is the job attitudes. Those attitudes which is related to what?
Job environment.
To what again? To performance, okay? And of course, this is related to job environment, to the organization, okay, but this is related to performance and productivity and so on, okay? Now, one of those attitudes is job satisfaction, okay? Now, when you talk about job satisfaction, here we are talking about feeling related to work. But whenever there is job satisfaction, we are talking here about positive one. Exactly, okay? So, some people, they judge their work in a positive way, and this is going to develop some sort of satisfaction, high-level satisfaction, and sometimes maybe we are going to develop a negative idea, and this is going to result in dissatisfaction. Okay, what is the relation between satisfaction and performance? We are going to discuss this later in more details, but let us at least establish a platform for that. What is the relation between satisfaction and performance?
First, when satisfaction is high, performance will be effective, more effective.
Are you sure about this, Yani?
I think it's like most of the times. We cannot like generalize that there is a positive relationship between job satisfaction and performance, because again, it's not the only factor that affects performance. So I might have a very high job satisfaction, but there are other forces or other factors that affect my performance, and at the end of the day, my performance is going to be
okay. And one of those is skills. Okay, so sometimes people, they are satisfied, but they lack skills, so they are not going to perform according to the levels expected. Okay, and sometimes maybe people, they are dissatisfied, but they are going to perform well. Why? Because there is some sort of control exerted by the management, and they are forced to do their best. Okay, so again here there is no direct relation between satisfaction and performance, but there is a relation between satisfaction and other things. Okay, like for example, between satisfaction and absenteeism, between satisfaction and turnover, and this is going to affect productivity.
Yes.
This is going to affect productivity. That's why it is important. One of the most important job attitudes is job satisfaction. Okay. Of course, later on we are going to talk more about satisfaction, because it is the second part of this chapter. Okay. Of course, there are other attitudes which we are going to discuss later in the coming lecture. Okay. بكفي اليوم. اوكي، بس في assignment بدي اعطيك اياها، خلينا نحكي فيها الحين ال5 دقائق اللي معنا.